the Jim Heath Podcast.
So if you think you might have a medical issue, you go to your doctor or you go to specialists and they run a series of tests. And at the conclusion of those tests, if they come back positive for some disease, a plan is put together. And a lot of times that deals with medication that you can go on right away. A lot of diseases are not fatal. They don't mean you're going to be dead tomorrow. They don't mean that you are incapacitated. They simply confirm that there is an issue and you have to take care of it. And if you're in public office, in my view, then you owe it to your constituents, the people that pay you, to be as truthful and transparent about your diagnosis as possible. When it comes to dementia, this is very personal to me. My best friend and the person I love most on the planet, my mother, has been walking down this long goodbye path for a decade. I am acutely aware of the signs of dementia. I'm also aware of what it means early on and long term. I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a specialist. My training on this issue comes from personal experience. I'm the primary caregiver for my mother. And dealing with her memory loss has been challenging. And frankly, where it leads all patients who have the diagnosis is troubling. But I'm also here to say that as I look back on this path that my mother's been on for a decade, dealing with dementia, in the early years, we developed a system where pretty much myself and family members and medical professionals became sort of a crutch. And with that crutch, for my mother dealing with memory issues, we could fill in blanks, and she functioned completely normal, completely fine. But the key thing I want you to know from personal experience about dementia is that when you get the diagnosis, you're put on medication. And you need to get on that medication quickly. Because that medication for dementia and Alzheimer's and the other forms of memory loss that come under that dementia umbrella, those medications will slow down the progression. But there is no medication yet, none, that will restore memory. So if you wait to get a diagnosis of dementia, and you wait to go on the medication that helps slow it down, then you are putting yourself, and in the case of the president, you're putting the country at risk. Now, look, I'm talking to you today. I just flipped on the camera to have this conversation from the heart. I have no notes. There's no script. I'm just talking out loud now about my experience with dementia. And I will say that it is not to be swept under the rug. You can't take questions about memory loss and put it in the closet and pretend that it doesn't exist. The reaction by the president and, frankly, a lot of individuals on the left has reminded me so much of the Trump reaction and the Republican reaction that it has disturbed me enough to make this video and share with you my experiences on an issue that is too important to pretend isn't happening. The President of the United States is showing signs of memory loss. He's 81. He's had 2 brain surgeries. He is making mention of world leaders who have been long dead. He has scuttled walking up the stairs to Air Force One, choosing instead just a few steps to get into the belly of Air Force One. His coordination is in question. It is what it is. And to see people who bring this topic up now attacked in the same way that Trump attacks anything he doesn't like, it is just politically disturbing to me. Now, look, I'm a journalist. I'm not an advocate for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, Republican, Democrat. I've always tried to call it down the middle the best I can. If I think you're a threat to democracy based on your statements, I will say so. And I have said so a lot about Donald Trump. But we are having a serious election this year, and I believe everything needs to be on the table so the American people can understand perhaps the path that President Biden is on and what he is going to have to expect and what we're going to have to do to help him. Now, look, there's a thing called the mini mental state exam. My mom had it about a decade ago. It's pretty common to test memory. Experts give it to you. You go to a neurologist and they give you the test. You can score up to 30 points. If you score 27, 28 points out of 30, there's no issue. President Biden could take that test tomorrow and have the results released to the public, and this whole video and every other commentator would be moot. Because if you score 27, 28 points on that exam, it means you don't have much of an issue. My mom, when she took it the first time a decade ago, scored 22 of 30. That's concerning. It means there is an issue. And she immediately went on medication. That medication that helps slow down the progression of dementia and Alzheimer's. It's key to take that test if you think there's any issue and to get on that medication, because again, there is no medication if you wait that's going to restore memory. None. You can't do it. It doesn't exist. There's no magic formula to recharge the brain cells. And look, I think Donald Trump should take this test too, and I think he should release it to the public. He's almost 80 years old. He's just a few years younger than Joe Biden. Now, based on my experience of being around my mother for the last 10 years, I see a lot more parallels with Joe Biden and his behavior and his memory loss to my mother than Trump. I think Trump is out of shape and he's near 80 and he gets tired and then he just says stuff off the top of his head. That's my own personal assessment, but I believe he should take the mini mental state exam and see how many points out of 30 he scores. It's important because dementia is a disease. And just like cancer and MS and Parkinson's and diabetes and all other diseases, there are treatment plans for it. And it doesn't necessarily mean a death sentence tomorrow. From my own personal experience with my mother, as I said earlier, the first few years, with just some gentle help to fill in some of the blanks when she would have a memory lapse, she was completely functional. We now know that in the second term of President Reagan, he was dealing with the beginning of dementia. He went through the Iran-Contra hearings. Former Senator Howard Baker was brought in on behalf of the cabinet to kind of test President Reagan to see if he was still able to get up in the morning and function during the day. He concluded that Reagan indeed could do that with a little help. The next year, Reagan went to Moscow. He met with Mikhail Gorbachev. He walked the streets. He met the people of Moscow, and he signed a very historic nuclear weapon ban treaty with Gorbachev. Reagan was functional to the end of his presidency with a little help. Almost a year to the day after he left the White House, Reagan was involved in a court trial regarding Iran-Contra. He was on the stand,
don't recall it,
and Reagan was shown pictures of former cabinet members, and he couldn't recognize them. People that he had worked with for years and years. He couldn't recall who they were. His biographer went back and looked at Reagan's diary. Reagan wrote in his diary extensively for decades during his political career. And what the biographer discovered is that Reagan had been cheating. That, as an example, he would go to a White House dinner and he would grab the program or the little card that was prepared for him about who was at his table, who they were, what they did, what the function was about. And at the end of the evening, Reagan would take that program and he'd tuck it in his suit coat pocket and he'd walk up to the residence and he would take it out and then he would begin to write in his diary. And verbatim, he would put whatever was on the program. Had a lovely conversation with Bob and Susie tonight. And what the biographer discovered is that Bob and Susie weren't there. They had not been able to make the dinner. Reagan had simply taken the program and relied on it for the factual information, as he wrote in his diary, even though the conversation never took place. There are other examples of that, but we know that Reagan was struggling with dementia. At the end of his presidency, he couldn't recognize anybody a year after he left the presidency. And then in 1994, he wrote that beautiful letter to the American people saying that he had Alzheimer's and he would simply be going away. It would take 10 more years for him until he finally passed away due to complications of Alzheimer's. But Reagan famously wrote the letter and shared that with the American public in 1994. I don't know what Reagan would have done if the diagnosis had come during the second term of his presidency. My gut intuition is that the Reagans were always pretty open about the cancer they had, both he and his wife Nancy, about different ailments that they had. He might have just come clean. We don't know that. But what we do know is that Reagan was suffering from it, but he was functional with the help of his staff. If Joe Biden has the early signs, which I believe he does, of early dementia, then he simply needs to take the neurology test, release that to the public, and talk about how he's going to function. And truthfully, based on my experience with my mom, he could be quite truthful in saying, from time to time, I'm going to have some memory issues. I'm 81 and I've scored a little low on the mini mental state exam. And so from time to time, I'm going to need some help from my staff and my family. And I think people would be like, I know the millions that are dealing with dementia and their families, like I am, would be like, that is truthful. That's what you do. That's how you live with the disease and function with a family member who has the disease. It's the honest thing to do. In my mom's experience over the last decade, the first half, she was fully aware that she was having memory issues. She was conscious of it. And so she would ask for help because she knew that she was struggling sometimes with her memory. There comes a time, again, from my experience and looking at Senator Feinstein, where individuals with dementia kind of cross a line and they no longer see themselves having a problem. They no longer believe they have a problem because they can't remember having a problem. So in the case of Senator Feinstein, in her last year or last years in office, she would have a phone conversation with somebody at 1 o'clock, and by 1:10, she didn't remember having it. Or she'd have a meeting with staff at 2 o'clock, and they'd have to have a meeting again at 4 o'clock because it's like the 2 o'clock meeting never happened. That is when dementia becomes troubling. It is part of the journey, and it will happen. Again, there are medications to slow down the progression of the various forms of dementia. There is no medication to restore memory. But what I want to emphasize to everybody in this conversation that I'm sharing with you from the heart and from my own experience with the person I love most, my mom, is that an early diagnosis of dementia is not a death sentence, and it doesn't mean that you cease being functional. It means you need to get medication to help slow it down. And you need a plan of how you're going to incorporate people around you helping you like a crutch when you have holes in your memory, when you need help kind of filling in the blanks. That is the honest, truthful way to deal with this particular disease. There is no turning it back. There is no curing it. There is no miracle medication that restores memory. None. And so in this very interesting election cycle that we're in, where we're going to see a rematch between two of our oldest presidential candidates in history, I believe it would be relevant to have both of them do neurological tests. The mini mental state exam would be a perfect one because there's 30 points you can score. Let's see what the points are. And then be honest about what we're going to do in case these candidates, and President Biden in particular, score 25 points or below. Dementia sounds scary, and it is. It's devastating. Eventually, it robs a human being of all of their life experiences. Everything that they've done, everyone that they've met, everywhere that they've gone, disappears from the brain. But it is a long path in most cases. And when you're in public office dealing with any form of disease, including dementia, to me, honesty and transparency is the best way to educate the American people of what you're going through and leave it to them to make a determination of how much leeway they're going to give you in battling any disease to represent them in public office. I covered Joe Biden a lot in 2008 in South Carolina when he was running for president. I covered him even more in 2012 when he was vice president running for re-election, crisscrossing Ohio a lot that year. From my experience, Joe Biden is a nice, decent guy. This is not about Joe Biden not liking Joe Biden or wanting to attack Joe Biden. This is about someone who has been a primary caregiver for a person that I adore, my mother, who has been walking this path of dementia for a decade. It is a disservice to her and millions of other Americans inflicted with dementia and Alzheimer's and other memory-related loss to have the subject matter swept under the rug and people attacked when they raise the issue. That's been going on from Republicans and Trump and the right for far too long, and it is devastating to see the response to questions about the president's mental health be treated in the same way by his supporters on the left. Let's have transparency and honesty. Dementia is not a death sentence. It's a disease. And if somebody has it, it should be diagnosed as soon as possible to get on the medications that can slow the disease. But there is no cure for it. And so to go into denial mode and refuse to even get testing and share that testing with the American people is wrong. That is the wrong way to treat this, regardless of who you are, what party you're in, or whether the presidency's at stake. The American people deserve the truth, and they deserve to have it sooner than later. On a personal note, I will just say this. I wish there was a magic wand to restore memory. And my hope is that families like mine, watching the long goodbye from the person we adore and love most, my mother, the thought that in 20 years or 30 years, that will no longer be an issue is what we hold on to. That's our hope. And my hope for you is that you never have to experience watching someone you love struggle. We need more education and transparency about it so that it's not taboo, that it's not funny, that it shouldn't be swept under the rug. The president can lead by example. By tackling this issue head on, by taking a neurology test, sharing the results with the American people, and being honest about what he's going to do about it, working with his medical team and his family. That would be refreshing and amazing. And honestly, that's what should happen. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for tuning into the channel. I'll see you soon.
You've been listening to the Jim Heath Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Please be sure to like the Jim Heath channel, subscribe, and check back for our next episode. Thank you for joining us.